Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, children of all ages. Buenas noches, chicos y chicas, damas y caballeros, niños de todas edades. Welcome to the Karey Carbaugh podcast, episode number 12. I do apologize that I'm a little bit late getting on tonight. You'll understand why as I go through this podcast. I was out living my purpose. As many of you know, one of the things that brings me joy, one of the things that I gain purpose from is feeding into young people. I've mentioned a few times on these podcasts that I've been involved in youth ministry over the years and worked with a number of different groups involving youth and children. And tonight I actually was at a high school concert for a high school friend of mine that invited me to come and hear him perform. And those are the kinds of things that bring me joy. And so even though I knew it was probably going to delay the podcast, I didn't know for sure how much. That's why I didn't put out a flyer ahead of time, because I didn't know exactly what time I was going to be able to jump on. But I still wanted to keep the same night and roughly the same time. But I also, it's kind of cool how God works. A week ago, I had no idea what I was going to be talking about, and the topic for tonight came about, and I thought, I'm just going to live life, and I know I'm jumping on a little bit late. I hope you all will forgive me. I'll ask for a little bit of grace in advance. But I did want to support him and pour into his life a little bit and the activities he's involved in. So I hope you guys will forgive me for delaying the start of this. I don't normally like to move the time around. But enough about that. Let's jump into tonight's podcast. As I mentioned a week ago, I didn't have any idea what I was going to talk about, and I love how God works sometimes. Actually, how God works all the time, but sometimes he really just amazes me, and he did that this week. This topic sort of came to me this Sunday through Pastor Nick at church, and so I'll give him a shout out too. I'm not sure if he'll watch this or not. He and I are friends, but thanks to God and thanks to Pastor Nick, because this sort of came out of his sermon on Sunday. Before we jump into it, though, if you're watching this live, if you could give me an L or a live in the comments. If you're watching this on the replay, give me an R or a replay in the comments. That'd be awesome. And let me know if you're gaining any value as I go through this, if you're getting value from this. So the message on Sunday it came out of the book of Mark, chapter 11, verses 12 through 25, where Jesus is walking through the desert and gets kind of hungry. And he walks up to this fig tree, and there's no figs. It looks like it's a beautiful fig tree. It's got a lot of beautiful leaves and looks nice, but there's no figs. And Jesus is kind of hungry, and he says to the fig tree, well, if you're not going to bear figs, then may you never bear figs. And the next thing, him and the disciples are watching, and this fig tree just withers up and dies. And the message that Nick shared, which I wanted to sort of piggyback off of, not going to be quite as religious focused as his was, but you'll see some elements through my talk that are definitely have a religious base to them. And I know not all of my followers are believers, and so I'll try to keep this applicable to everyone. But the message that Nick pulled out of this, and I've read this verse before and thought about it. Why did Jesus curse this poor fig tree just because it didn't happen to have figs that day. But if you think about it, a fig tree, its purpose is to have figs. Another place in the Bible, it talks about what would salt be if it wasn't salty. It would pretty much just be a rock or sand. If it was grains of salt and it wasn't salty, it would be sand. And it would not be living into its purpose. Well, the same is true with the fig tree. At least that particular day, we can assume that maybe this wasn't the first time that this fig tree didn't have figs. Maybe it was older. Maybe it had lived out its usefulness. We don't really know. But at this particular moment in time, that fig tree was not living into its purpose. And if you think about it, an apple tree without apples, it might be beautiful. It might look nice. It might provide some shade. But it's not an apple tree. It's not bearing apples if it doesn't have apples, it's not an apple tree. Or a peach tree or a pear tree. Pick any one of them. And so, how does this relate to us? I would encourage you to think for a moment. What is your purpose? One way to go about this and one way to think about this, coming back to what I first started out my podcast, the reason I was delayed, what brings you joy? What do you really enjoy doing that you don't have to really necessarily work that hard at? Maybe you do. Maybe you work hard to be better at it. But think of what it is in your life that you do at your absolute best with the least amount of effort. I have a few things for me. As I've mentioned, working with youth, pouring into youth, and children, mostly older children. I haven't worked a lot with younger children, but older children and youth, teaching Sunday school, pouring into them and just hearing their stories, hearing where they're at, supporting them on their journey. And of course, for me in particular, sharing Jesus with them and sharing a faith with them that they might develop the faith for themselves, which is another piece of my purpose, is sharing the gospel, sharing the good news of Jesus. I don't throw it in people's faces. I believe that I'm called to be that gentle nudging, not necessarily the guy that's out there shouting it from the street corner. That's somebody else's purpose, perhaps. But I also enjoy music. I enjoy singing. I'm actually going to be singing at Carnegie in New York City in the very near future. If you're interested in coming and meeting me face to face, some of my Facebook followers that may not know me one-on-one, or maybe we've gone on some trips together or met briefly. If you're going to be in the New York City area in the near future, either put New York or NYC in the comments and I will message you with more details, or send me a direct message if you'd like information on where you can come and hear our local choir that's been invited to perform at Carnegie in New York. That's another piece that gives me joy, that I believe is part of my purpose. Singing, music. We had to have this music memorized, and people ask me, how do you do it? Because as I've shared in previous podcasts with my limited vision, I can't read music during a performance, and so I have to memorize it all. I wouldn't say that it's memorized like solo ready, that if the music quit and the accompaniment quit and everybody around me quit singing, that I could just start singing a solo. Some pieces, yes, but not always. A lot of it is memorized enough to where I can lean into those around me. I try to surround myself with solid singers that can read the music. But for this particular concert, we all have to have it memorized. And going back to a topic that I've brought up on previous podcasts, I guess that's kind of a strength. And rather than playing to my weaknesses, limited vision being one of those, I try to play into my strengths. And I would encourage you all to play into your strengths. Think about what's your strength? If you'd like to, share that in the comments with me. As I've mentioned, one of my strengths is not responding to these comments during live broadcasts. That's not something that I can do easily. I'm working on some ideas and some technology and some ways to be able to hopefully start doing more interaction in the near future and not just be lecture. But at this point, that's not a strength. I'm not quite there yet. So if you'd like to share some of your strengths, I'd be very interested, and I will react and respond following the podcast. But think about yourself. Think about your own life. What brings you joy? Share that in the comments if you'd like to. Or if it's something more personal that you'd like to share on a more personal level, message me and we can start a private chat. Either way is fine. If you've got struggles, maybe you're struggling to try to find your purpose. Particularly if you're a person with some limitations and some weaknesses. Maybe you're struggling to find your purpose. Reach out. I'd love to help you discover that for yourself. And so going back to our fig tree and our example here, if we're not living into our purpose, if we're sitting back and doing nothing, as I've mentioned previously in podcasts, I've known of people with disabilities who withdraw from life. As I've mentioned, one of my philosophies is that I was dealt a hand of cards that I could either play or choose to fold. And I've chosen to play those cards. Many people choose to fold their hand. And in doing so, they're not living out their purpose. I don't believe that any one of us was put here to do nothing. Each one of us was put here on earth at a point in time for a specific purpose. There's a reason that all of us were not put here 2,000 years ago when Jesus physically walked the earth. Equally, there's a reason that we were not put here 1,000 years from now. Who knows what that's going to look like? Each one of us was put here on earth, I believe, by God, for a particular purpose, at a particular place and time. So what is that for you? What is that purpose for you? And are you living into that purpose? Are you being called to do something greater than what you're doing now? Maybe to lean into some of those gifts and some of those skills. I believe that we're all given gifts to share with others. I believe part of my purpose, as I've mentioned before, is to share that good news of God and of Jesus with the rest of the world in a subtle way. That's how I believe God has called me to live into that. Other people he's called to be more direct and more active. I believe he's called me to be more subtle, because we can reach different people in different ways that way. So what is that for you? What is your purpose? I would encourage you to give that some thought. If you've got some ideas, once again, put them in the comments, and I'd be most happy to interact with you about that. Are you living into your purpose? Let me know that. If not, let me know that. Maybe we can brainstorm some ideas together to help you live into your purpose. And I believe it's a relatively brief message tonight. I think that's all I've got to share with you tonight. But I did want to jump on here briefly. And I will be sharing more about New York City and that piece of my purpose in future podcasts. But once again, if you would like information on when and where that's happening, let me know, either in the comments or direct message me. If you would like to be added to my email list, I'm starting to build an email list to notify people of when I'm going live. I didn't send anything out this week in advance, just like I didn't send the flyer out because I wasn't sure exactly what time I was going to jump on here. But going forward, it will go back to a more consistent time at 8 p.m. Mountain Time. And I'd love to add you to my email list. So if you'd like to put email in the comments or direct message me with your email address, we can connect and I'll get you added to that email list. There's also going to be some other things that I'm working on now. I'll just leave it at that. Some masterclass ideas and some other more interactive things that I'm working on. So if you'd like to be a part of that, let me know and I can get you added to my email list. Either put email in the chat and I'll reach out to you, or drop me a direct message and we'll connect that way. So for now, since that's my message for tonight, I encourage you to have a blessed week and make it a good week for yourself and for those around you. Live into your purpose. Think about your purpose this week and let me know what that purpose is. And make it a great week. Do something positive for someone else. And until next week, for the next episode of the Karey Carbaugh podcast, have a blessed week, and thank you so much for joining me tonight. Good night.